let's have a look at Azure networking. Now, when we think about networking in Azure, then there is actually a couple of situations that we need to be aware of. The first one is that that we have, if we work with infrastructure as a service components, we now know that virtual machines as well as virtual networks are what we refer to as infrastructure as a service. Now, if if you look at infrastructure as a service, again, then what we know about this is that this has been designed for private use. Meaning, when you create a virtual machine in Azure, when you create a VNet in Azure, a virtual network, then these components by default are not connected to the internet. So what we could do is we could go into a situation where we could go say, hey, let's create a virtual machine. Whenever you create a virtual machine, whatever kind of virtual machine you create, what will always happen, or what is always necessary, is that that virtual machine is going to be connected to a virtual network or a VNet. A VNet in Azure consists out of an IP range, TCP/IP addresses, and within that IP range there always has to be a subnet as well. And what will happen is then when we connect that virtual network to that, if we connect the virtual network to the virtual machine, there is also going to be created a resource in Azure that is the network card, or the NIC, the network interface card. So whenever we create a virtual machine, this is always going to be the minimum situation. By the way, a VNet can have more than one subnet. So you could go and say, hey, let's create a couple of extra subnets with the purpose of creating smaller segments in your environment. Then this is one thing we can do. If you look at this situation, whenever you create a virtual machine and a NIC, then it's going to be the network card itself that is going to get the IP configuration. So the network card gets the IP configuration. The virtual machine is just going to act as a DHCP client, meaning whatever kind of IP address the NIC has, that is going to be the IP address that the virtual machine is going to use. So you will never go inside the virtual machine in Azure to change an IP address like you typically would in an on-premise environment. In Azure, you're not going to do that. This network, this virtual network, it comes with a default access to the internet in an outbound manner. Meaning, so the virtual machine, if you created it, it will be able to get access to the internet via a so-called network address translation solution. So this virtual machine is able to browse the internet, download updates, and so on. However, the virtual machine is designed for private use. That means that from, for example, your on-prem environment or from the internet, there is no way to by default connect to that virtual machine. So one of the things that we have to do is we need to enable that access to the virtual machine. Now, one of the ways that we can do this, which is definitely not recommended, is that if we just use the wizard in the Azure portal to create the virtual machine, then that wizard in the wizard in the portal is going to also provide the virtual machine with a public IP address. Again, this indeed is accessible from the internet. And that would allow internet-based computers to connect. So this is going to be the internet again. So internet-based computers could now connect to that public IP address, to the NIC, into the VM. Now, again, this is definitely not recommended, as if this is a, let's say, a production virtual machine. The protocol, for example, especially if the operating system is Windows, then the protocol that we use to connect to that virtual machine is RDP. And RDP, although the official name is the Remote Desktop Protocol, very often this is also referred to as the Ransomware Distribution Protocol. Therefore, please do not use this situation. It is possible maybe for some demoing or testing, but in no way in a production environment. This is at least one option. The better option is to allow access to this network in a different way. And then we have a couple of situations. Actually, what we can do is we can create 3 different kinds of extra subnets that we might want to implement here. So we could have this router connected to a subnet here, or we have, let's say, yet another subnet to connect to, or even another subnet to connect to, right? So we have different subnets. One of them is the Azure firewall subnet. It has to get this exact name, and what you do with the Azure firewall subnet is that you you are not going to guess this. You are going to connect an Azure firewall solution into that subnet. The goal of the firewall is that it will then allow people from the internet, or data sent towards the internet via that firewall. This firewall, by the way, is a scalable solution. So if we see a lot of traffic happening, then we could go and say, hey, you know what? Instead of running one single instance of a firewall, we can go somewhere between 1 and 50 different instances. So this, for example, if this environment grows big and the firewall grows very busy, then we can sort of scale this. This is an auto scaling solution that we could be thinking of. And then the idea is that we can manage and control the traffic from the VNet to the internet, or from the internet to the VNet, like any other normal firewall. One thing we can say about this firewall is that this firewall is a layer 7 firewall, allowing us to do all kinds of fancy things depending on how much you want to pay for it. But it comes with so it has a intrusion detection and prevention system. It can do TLS inspection, which is allowing you to inspect HTTPS traffic. We can set up web content filtering. It's just application layer filtering as well. So there's a couple of these functionalities that any other firewall can do, by the way. But here at least we have the Azure version of a firewall. An alternative, so this is for, and this firewall is pretty much for any kind of traffic. Now in some,
Just a question.
yeah,
Can you replace Azure firewall with any other firewalls, or is it like the standard? And
no,
if you want to replace it, then it's kind of difficult.
no, it's not difficult at all. Let me show you what I mean. In Azure, there is something called a marketplace. And in the marketplace, you can also go and create all kinds of solutions. So if I go for networking here, then here we have, let's say, the Azure solutions, which are the first, right? Those are featured. But then we also have other options, like if you are if you're used to work with like Cisco solutions or Palo Alto solutions, or if I go here, I can search for example, for F5, right? We know F5 as a appliance provider, we can get that. Or if you want to use Palo Alto as a solution provider, they have virtual appliances in Azure as well. Or maybe you've heard of something called I always forget the name, which is typically a spam filter. Man, I always forget the name.
Checkpoint.
Sorry?
Checkpoint.
Well, Checkpoint would be here as well. In that, indeed. No, actually, I was thinking, and now I know. So thank you anyway. I was thinking about Barracuda.
Mm.
Barracuda, is it here? Barracuda also has like solutions as well. So what you can do is you can just create a subnet and have then you can connect that Barracuda, Cisco, F5, Palo Alto, any checkpoint solution to that instead of an Azure firewall, just fine. Just fine. Not a problem. Um, then so and then some organizations actually prefer to have other solutions for this kind of security because they know those other solutions. If you already have been doing some kind of schooling on, I don't know, let's say Cisco, then you might feel more comfortable working with Cisco virtual appliances than what Microsoft has to offer. So yes, absolutely true. There is many third-party components that you can get from the marketplace and just place into your Azure solution. Absolutely true. So yeah, thank you for that question. Another option that we can add here is something called an Azure Bastion subnet. Now, the idea of creating an Azure Bastion subnet is to host an Azure Bastion device. Now, a Bastion device is also very often referred to as a jump host or a jump box. So the idea is that if you want to manage virtual machines inside that network, so if you want to sign into that virtual machine using, for example, RDP if it's Windows, or Linux, SSH if it's Linux, then you could create a bastion here. And the idea of the bastion is that it's here to allow only inbound traffic, by the way. So it's not monitoring outbound traffic. It's just about the inbound traffic for, well, virtual machine management. So for example, RDP if your virtual machine is Windows, or SSH if your virtual machine is Linux, then we can go in and allow that kind of traffic. Just like that. This is also the more secure way, because instead of allowing either RDP or SSH via a public IP address straight into the VM, where the virtual machine itself is going to be responsible for authenticating the person signing in, the Azure Bastion is making sure that it is, well, first of all, this also has somewhere between 1 and 50 instances, but it can use it will use Entra ID, and role-based access control to allow or disallow people to sign in into those virtual machines. So that is so we can add multi-factor authentication into that. We can add conditional access into that part as well. So it's a way more secure situation in that case. And then also another option is to create a subnet that we are going to call a gateway subnet. And what we're going to connect to the gateway subnet is going to be a virtual network gateway. A virtual network gateway. Oh, okay, that doesn't fit, and that's annoying, but all right, I'm going to leave it. Virtual network gateway is a solution that we can implement if you want to connect from your on-premises environment let's say you have your firewall here, then what we can do is we can use this virtual network gateway to create a tunnel between your virtual network and the virtual network that we are hosting in Azure. So one option here is that we allow this via the internet, and in that case, we are going to make use of a site-to-site VPN. Another solution, let's say this is an or statement. We can go say, or you could go and say, hey, I want to create an express route solution. Remember from earlier, an express route allows us to redirect traffic from your on-prem environment into Azure outside of the internet. And this will then give us a way more personal, or private connection between your on-prem environment and the resources in your virtual network. So this allows us to set up interconnectivity between your environment and the Azure environment. In some cases, you will also see that organizations are going to implement that virtual network gateway in sort of a high available situation. So the idea in that case is that we would be running more than one gateway. The virtual network gateways are also zone redundant, so you can, so those are zone availability, zone aware solutions as well. So this is how we typically would look at an Azure virtual network, which is typically designed for virtual machines. In some situations, you may have multiple virtual networks in Azure. So you might have a VNet and you might have another VNet. One nice option that you might like to implement is an option where we can have different virtual networks being connected directly with one another. This is what we do here. So what we are configuring here, this is what we call VNet peering. And that allows us to create like direct connectivity between different virtual networks. So for example, in a situation where we would have another virtual network with another virtual machine connected to another subnet or another virtual network here, then we can have these two virtual machines communicate directly via that VNet peering without us having to set up all kinds of configurations like site-to-site VPN connectivity and so on. So this is just going to be a direct communication. One of the cool things about VNet peering is that this will work. Let's say this is an inter-regional solution, meaning that virtual network 1 could, for example, be in West Europe. Virtual network 2 could be, for example, in East US. And we can just have these things communicate with each other. Or even more so, this is also an inter-tenant enabled solution, meaning that you could have your virtual network. Maybe a business partner organization has its own virtual network and we want to connect directly. We can set that up as well. So this is in fact an interesting way of, well, creating and having more virtual networks connected to each other. And based on this, one of the more, let's say, one of the more popular topologies, or let's say a well-known topology that we use because of this kind of networking is called the hub and spoke topology. So what you see in Azure often is that we would have, for example, one virtual network, which we call the hub virtual network. And the hub virtual network is, for example, used for central communication. So, for example, to and from the internet, maybe by making use of a bastion as well as a firewall. Maybe also this hub network is also used for creating that tunnel between your on-prem environment and this hub network, right? So this is like what we have been drawing earlier. And then we can have, for example, another virtual network, which we refer to as the spoke VNet. Let's say we have a spoke VNet, and the idea of spoke VNet is to run some kind of a solution here. So we have, let's say, solution one is here, and maybe we yet have another VNet, which we will refer to as another spoke VNet, which allows us to run solution 2, and then using virtual network peering like this, or using virtual network peering like this, we can then go and say, hey, we have one central VNet for connectivity here. We have two VNets for different solutions, and they are able to communicate with each other, and we can control that kind of communication. Then this is actually a very well-known way to set up the networking inside your Azure environment. Actually, there is one more thing that I want to mention about this situation right here, and that is at the NIC level. So if you have created a virtual network and a virtual machine, then we have a network interface there. One other thing that we can connect to a NIC, one other way that we want to connect to a NIC, let's make it look good, is something called a network security group, or an NSG. So if I look at an NSG here, NSG, this is a network security group. Basically, this is a layer 4 firewall solution, which is not as smart as a layer 7 firewall. Basically, the only thing that a layer 4 firewall can make its decisions on is basically it can go say, hey, where is the source of the traffic, right? Where is what is the destination of this network packet that I'm looking at? What is the protocol that we use? And then we have, based on all that, we can have our decision or our permission where we could, well, either allow or block the traffic. So the source in this case is an IP address together with a port. The destination is an IP address and a port. The protocol is either TCP or UDP. UDP, and the permission is either allow or block, right? So this is basically the options that we have. So with this, this is what we configure here. Very simplistic. However, when we think about IP and ports, but there is for us different ways to define those IP addresses and ports. We can do this using IP ranges or individual an IP address, but you can also work with something called service tags. And service tags, they basically they are they point to IP addresses, but they are named differently. For example, you can say, hey, the internet. So if traffic is heading for or coming from the internet, then we can make a decision. Or, for example, you may be running some kind of solution in Azure, like a database or storage account or an app service. You can go say, hey, if this traffic is heading towards an app service, service tag, or a storage account, service tag, or a SQL database, service tag, we can also configure that as well. Just mentioning that this is a little bit a different way for us to go and set it, to configure the IP addresses, but in the end, it's a layer 4, so there's nothing smart in the system. Pretty much an if this then that component. The network security group, like any normal firewall, comes with inbound and outbound rules, and that is basically what we do there, right? So these are used for inbound and outbound rules. Very simplistic. Oh, again, if you want to learn more about that, in this AZ900 course, we do not have all the time to go in and look for that. But if you search for Alex de Jong and then search for NSG, then I'm pretty sure that there is here a video, which is a I don't know, 25-minute video on network security groups. Oh, this is in Dutch. That's not going to help you. Sorry for that. Well, there is. I'm pretty sure we have one. Or just go into virtual networking, because I also have a video on VNet peering. Here is a virtual machine and networking overview. This is a 1 hour video, including more demos. We're in this other, let's say in the other courses we have more time. But if you want to get some more information, then there's some videos here you might like to check out as well. So all the stuff that you might like at that point. So this is so if you think about virtual networking in Azure, then this is one way to approach this. One way meaning that we are approaching this from the infrastructure as a service kind of solutions. Let me just go and save this picture first. So this is picture 07, networking, or let's say infrastructure as a service networking, PNG. Here we go. Next to this, we can also look at the platform as a service networking in Azure. So let's try and do this again, networking in Azure. Now we will be looking into the platform as a service components, or software as a service components. Now, if I am running an app, let's say I've chosen to run an application, then in earlier today we have looked into how we can run those applications. So we could go say, hey, this could be done by using a virtual machine, or we could have made use of an app service. Also, we may have been working with some kind of a container-based container kind of service as well, or we can look at function level services as well. So there is different ways of hosting this application. In some of these, especially those last three here, this is platform as a service. And with platform as a service, we know that this is designed for public use. Meaning, if I have an app service, if I run an app service or a container service or a function service, these solutions, they have a fully qualified domain name as default, right? By default. So you could go and say, hey, but if that app service is public anyway, why would I think about virtual networking in the first place? And you're right, because it makes no sense. If you create in Azure an app service, here, so if you create an app service in Azure, then this app service comes with a fully qualified domain name here. I can try to connect to it, and here we can see, hey, it doesn't have any content yet, but we are able to access this, right? So this is the default content of my app service. It even has a little winky eye thing going on every now and then. See, it winks. But that is so. I would never need a virtual machine, so therefore I would also not need a firewall, a layer 7 firewall, or a site-to-site VPN connection or express route. We don't need that in order to access the app. Also, if you think of it, if I would go to this other tenant that I run here, let's say that other universe, if I check my app services here, I can see that I do have an app service called MoApp here. And also my MoApp app service, the one that is hosting my website, moap.ms, it comes with a default fully qualified domain name. moab.azurewebsites.net. And if I click this button, it will actually take me to that Moab website. I have added also a custom domain, that custom domain being moab.ms. Therefore, I can also connect to it straight via moab.ms. That will give me the same response, as you can see, right? So it's exactly the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing, but also when I created this, even if I didn't add my moab.ms domain name, I would already be able to communicate with this with moab.azurewebsites.net. Public by default. So you can question, do we need anything extra? Well, just for a simple web app, you don't need anything other than the web app. However, you may be interested in situations where, for example, you are running more than one instance, right? So it could be that you have, let's say, hey, you know what? I'm running a second instance of the application here, and I need to create some kind of a load balancing solution between them. Well, in that case, what we can do is we can create two options. One of them is something called an Azure load balancer. Another thing we can build is an Azure application gateway. Basically, two different solutions for the same purpose. That is, if traffic comes in here, then we need to decide which of the two backend components will be getting the traffic, right? And that is the purpose of a load balancer, where an Azure load balancer can pretty much be used for any kind of protocol. So any kind of traffic, where the application gateway is HTTP only. That, by the way, includes HTTPS, of course. But that is basically what we do. And one of the nicer things that the application gateway has, optionally, you can also add something called a web application firewall component in there, which is by itself a layer 7 firewall that has a lot of predefined protection, predefined protection, or let's say predefined rules, which sounds a little bit better, that we can add in order to also protect our applications a little bit better. However, these solutions here, are so-called regional solutions, meaning this could, for example, all be happening in, let's say, West Europe. Let's say everything here is happening in Azure in the West Europe region. Now, what if I have a solution that is bigger than this? Maybe I have also, let's say, a part of my solution in North Europe. You know what? Maybe if I'm running it in Brazil South, right? Because it could be that big. So let's say the other side of my application runs in Brazil South. Then we could also go in and say, okay, you know what? I run another instance of this application like this. Then we could also here, if we have multiple instances, we can also go here and create a situation where, well, maybe we have again an Azure load balancer here, load balancer, or we can have an application gateway here, also with the same purpose again, right? Like this. However, now my application is a global solution. So what I may want is that if a user of my application is connecting to, for example, my public DNS, here, this is public DNS now, to connect to, for example, a certain URL. So here we can say, hey, I'm going to request a URL. Then, well, I may be pointing into the direction of, let's say, West Europe. I may be pointing into the direction of Brazil South. But if I want to make sure that people in South America are connecting to Brazil South, and if people in Europe are connecting to the West Europe, then what I may want to implement here on this level in Azure, which we can see as in this case, this is what we're going to refer to as a global solution. These are global solutions. We have something called the something called a traffic manager. By the way, traffic manager also will work for pretty much any protocol, or we can make use of something called the Azure front door service, which is HTTP or HTTPS only. That will also allow for the use of a web application firewall plus WAF. And that will then, basically the cool part is, we can tell to this user, hey, you know what, you want to connect to this website, to this one URL, let's say moab.ms, then I'm going to send you into this global load balancing solution, and that will then send us either into this direction, or I'm going to send you into that direction because we might need to go and connect to Brazil, or we might need to go and connect into West Europe, right? So, and just like that, we can do some kind of a global load balancing solution. Cool, huh? I know, this is super cool. So then we can create this complete solution without the need of virtual networks. Without any VNet, all the networking is handled by the platform as a service-based solution, except if my app is running on a virtual machine. Because if there's a virtual machine, there is always a virtual network. So this is a way to set up networking in Azure.